I just want to take just a few minutes because I want to leave time for questions, just to kind of reiterate a few things from the other presentations, and then touch on a couple of points which I think weren't covered as fully as I'd like. So first is, again, to repeat, US versus UK, very, very different. The second is the difference between the MA and the PhD. So I have been on the PhD admissions committee at George Washington University several times. I've also been the director of the MA program for about 10 years. And there are very, very different things that we're looking for in those. And one of the things which you might want to think about is your career goals and would they be better served with an MA degree versus a PhD degree? Because there are certain kinds of professional aspirations where an MA degree, certainly in Washington in the United States, is more or less a prerequisite for employment. But a PhD is overkill, and as Stephen said, won't help you at all. And so as you're crafting your cover letter, think seriously about what your professional aspirations are. If they're to go into teaching political science in a university setting, absolutely go for the PhD. If your goal is to go into government, to work for a think tank, to do policy analysis, an MA degree might be a smarter way of going. If you decide to go into the PhD route, I really want to emphasize at least in the US level, the two-stage process that you're dealing with that both Rich and Stephen mentioned. So I will typically get 200 to 250 applications, and we can accept maybe 20. But we want to emphasize these are not 250 people who are applying for Middle East political science. This is for everything. And most of the admission slots, of which we might get 20 to 25, are going to Americanists, American politics people. And everything else is divided between the IR and the comparative. And so whoever is on the committee is going to need to be, quite selective within that. And so we do have a bar. It's not a formally written bar, but if your GRE scores or your grades aren't going to be competitive when it goes into the full committee, it's just going to be a waste of time. Because nobody, at least I can't speak about other committees, but at GW, all decisions are made by a full committee, which includes representatives from all the subfields. And so if I happen to know that someone has done an excellent job doing policy analysis for a think tank, and they're really, really great, but they don't have the credentials that the rest of the department considers to be important, I'm not going to be able to get that person through. You need to get an advocate who's impressed by your research and your background in all the ways that Stephen and Rich were talking about, but it's not going to be enough. You need to be able to clear the bar, not just with me, but with the department as a whole. And so that's just something just to keep in mind as you're crafting. You're crafting your research, your personal statement, which I think is more important in the US than it is in the British system. Something that shows that your aspirations are to be part of a department of political science where you'll fit in with a cohort of not just Middle East policy people, but people who are engaged in the broader political science field. So the letter, the research statement, or so the personal statement is just extremely important. It tells me, can you write? Can you think? What are you interested in? And will you be a good fit for the program? And that's probably the thing that I spend by far the most time on. The writing sample is I'm only going to spend time on if I'm impressed with the personal statement. I barely pay any attention to letters of recommendation. They're either generic and useless, or they hurt you. Where they do help is where Stephen was talking about. If there's someone, a professor who worked closely with you and who can really speak to what you do, to be able to explain who you are. This person might not look like a political science person, but let me tell you their evolution. They started off in physics, and then they discovered their love of conflict resolution, and that helps a tremendous amount. So find someone who knows you well and can give you that, can tell your story in their letter. Those are the letters that help you. Most of the others, even if your country's prime minister or king, it's not going to help. What we need is someone who can tell your story and tell it well. So there's a lot of other things that you heard from the others. I don't want to repeat in the interest of time. The only thing I'm going to say is have somebody else read your personal statement. Have them read it and tell you if it's good. Someone you trust to be critical, because
things that are poorly written are going to hurt you in ways that you might not believe, but it's very true. Okay, I want to emphasize three things, though, that I think didn't come up enough that you want to think about in the process. The first is knowing where to apply. And so there was some discussion of this, but I want to really highlight it. Know the departments that are going to be good places for you to do research. So being highly ranked is nice, but not if they don't do the kind of work or support the kind of work that you want to do. And it's so, again, I'm not telling you to ignore the rankings. If it tells you that Princeton and Stanford are the best, probably Princeton and Stanford are pretty darn good. But you need to know, are there multiple faculty members there and a cohort of students who are doing the kind of work that you do? And again, I think this is different from the UK. You never want to go to a place where there's only a single faculty member who does that work, no matter how perfect they are for you, because that person could leave. You might have a personality conflict with that person, and then you're stuck in a department which doesn't value or support the kind of work that you do. So really do your research on the profile of the departments that you're applying to. And that includes both the faculty members, but also look at the students and recent graduates. Did they get jobs? What kind of publications have they put out? Do they seem like the kind of people who are producing the kind of work that you want to do? Because one of the best reflections of the faculty and the support in a department is not what the faculty themselves have done. They built that career themselves. It is, what have their students done? And are those students the kind of political scientists that you would like to be? And so spending some time doing that research will make a huge difference. When you're writing your cover letter and you're mentioning the people at the university that you want to work with, it does you no good to simply do a dump of every name you found on the website. I want to work with this person because you found them all. I think Stephen or one of you said, you want to be able to explain, I want to work with this person for this reason, and this other person who might not be a Middle East person for this other reason. And that goes a long way. At the same time, don't ignore people who are obvious. So if you apply to MIT, don't neglect to mention Rich Nielsen, because he's going to look at your file and he's going to say, why aren't I in this file? Do they even know anything about MIT's political science? So doing your homework, you have to remember, I've got 200 files to read, and I need to get it down to 1 or 2 people for whom I'm going to advocate. Don't give me a reason to eliminate you. That's just something to really think about. Okay, at the US system, we do not care about the research proposal in the same way that the UK system does. When someone tells me that I want to come to GW and work on Shia militias in the world systems approach, I say, okay, maybe. Because the way our system works is you're going to spend your first 2 years doing intensive methodology training. You're going to be doing coursework, which is going to be really, field seminars in your chosen subfields. You're going to have to pass your comprehensive exams. And only at the end of that will you begin writing your dissertation proposal, which is going to reflect the methodological training and subfield training that you received in the first 2 years. And so basically, it would be in some sense a failure of our program if you came in writing a dissertation exactly the same way on the same topic that you proposed at the outset. And I think this might be the biggest difference between the two systems, is that you should not sell yourself as the person who wants to work with Stephen Brooke on Egyptian social service provision and Islamism. Sell yourself as someone who is interested in studying how social movements use social services to win votes, and Stephen Brooke would be a great person for you to work with, and you're hoping to acquire these methodologies because of the outstanding reputation of the University of Wisconsin-Madison in this area. That's the sort of thing that we look for in a really competitive thing. Finally, I just want to say that the funding situation is a bit different as well in the US and the UK. In general, I would never recommend going to a PhD program in the US if you are not offered a full funding package. The job market is extremely competitive. You do not want to leave with high levels of debt. Unless you're independently wealthy, in which case go for it. But generally speaking,
we no longer have a situation in the US where you have a lot of programs that admit 40 people without funding and then decide which 10 of them will get funding in the second year, which was what was done at many of the top programs in the past. These days, there's more emphasis on getting a cohort fully funded and supporting them with the hopes of having them finish within a 6 to 7 year period. And if you are offered admission without funding, think very, very carefully about where that probably puts you in the cohort and how heavily invested they are in you and what that's going to mean for you in terms of supporting yourself without an income for 6 to 7 years. And so, again, this is quite different, I think, from the British model, where funding seems to be much scarcer and harder to come by. So those are just some pointers that I wanted to fill in.